Now, the talks come a day after Ukraine launched a set of unprecedented attacks on air bases deep inside Russia. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, said the strikes were months in the making. Separately, at least 7 people were killed when 2 bridges in Russia were blown up near the border with Ukraine.
Smoke billows near a Russian airfield. A drone flies overhead, followed by gunshots. This unverified footage purports to show drones launching from a truck parked nearby. Russian officials confirmed the area was hit during Ukraine's brazen drone assault targeting military aircraft. In footage released by Ukraine's security service, a man speaking Ukrainian describes this as Belaya, an airbase in Siberia almost 6,000 kilometers away from the front lines. The location could not be independently verified. But the Kremlin confirmed 5 bases were hit. Kyiv says it smuggled more than 100 drones into Russia and launched them remotely. It estimates the damage at $7 billion. President Zelenskyy said the attack, called Operation Spider's Web, was the result of elaborate planning.
Russia suffered truly significant losses, entirely justified and deserved. It is genuinely satisfying when something I authorized a year and 6 months ago comes to fruition and deprives Russians of over 40 units of strategic aviation.
The blow to Russia's arsenal came as 2 bridges exploded in different locations near Ukraine's border. Both collapsed on top of passenger trains, killing several and injuring dozens. It's unclear what caused the blasts, but Russia has called it terrorism.
And DW correspondent Max Zander is following events for us from the Ukrainian capital. Max, President Zelenskyy has described these attacks as historic. What's the latest on them?
Right, Beaver. So these drone attacks are seen as a major success. This operation, codenamed Web, seen as a major success here in Ukraine, and some have been comparing it to other successful Secret Service operations in the past here earlier in the war, such as the bombing attack on the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea with the Russian mainland. President Zelenskyy yesterday in his nightly address thanked the SBU for the operation and shared some insight. He said he personally oversaw the operation and that it was 1.5 years in the making, so significant lead time to the operation. He also said that all the operatives involved in the operation had been brought to safety in Ukraine prior to these attacks being remotely carried out. The SBU says that 34% of aircraft stationed on the respective airfields were attacked, so destroyed or significantly damaged. So what that exactly means, and we also have to say we cannot independently verify these numbers. What that exactly means remains to be seen, but the Russians are likely going to have issues replacing these aircraft. Some of them come from the Soviet era. The production has been discontinued. Maintenance already on aircraft was very difficult due to sanctions. So the Russian Air Force likely is limited in its operations. Long-range bombing attacks against Ukraine, projecting power in general with a nuclear capable bombers is going to be a little bit more or a lot more difficult in future for them, but it's certainly not going to change the course of the war, but it shows that Ukraine is able to get to the Russians wherever they want in the country with significant planning, even with unconventional methods.
Now, Max, both sides have carried out attacks over the weekend ahead of today's peace talks in Istanbul. That seems like a bit of a contradiction, doesn't it? In one way, yes, and another way, no. I mean, both sides have diametrically opposed goals for the talks and for the end of this war. Both sides are trying to assert dominance, and both sides are trying to strengthen their negotiating position. Ever since the two sides came together in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago, Russia has launched the largest aerial attacks on Ukraine we've seen since the beginning of the war, only to be followed by another even bigger aerial attack, inflicting serious damage on Ukraine, also causing civilian casualties. Now, what we saw now with these recent drone attacks conducted by Ukraine, we don't know if this is a direct connection time-wise to what happened over the last 2 weeks
and to the talks that are scheduled to happen today. Also, since there was this significant lead time, so we don't know if they waited to pull the trigger for this exact date, the day before the negotiations, but certainly this is also, from a Ukrainian perspective, going to help their case and going to strengthen their position.
With that being the background, what can we expect to come out of today's talks in Istanbul?
Right, so what we know is that both sides will come together at noon in Istanbul today. The Ukrainian delegation, they only announced yesterday that they would take part in the talks. It will be headed by Rustem Umerov, the Ukrainian defense minister. The Russian delegation is going to be led by Vadim Madinsky, who's more of a junior partner there. For now, we do not exactly know what the Russians want. They have failed to present their memorandum so far, but the Ukrainians certainly are going to push for a ceasefire deal followed by exchange of all POWs and for the returning of 20,000 abducted kids. It's going to be very difficult, and we're not expecting a breakthrough today.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Max Zander, DW correspondent in Kyiv. Thanks so much. Representatives from Ukraine and Russia are set to meet in Istanbul later on Monday for talks on a potential path to peace. The meeting comes a day after Ukraine launched massive attacks on Russian air bases as far away as Siberia, targeting bomber aircraft. Kyiv says the strikes follow months of secretive planning. In his nightly address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy praised his security forces for carrying out the attacks.
34% of the strategic cruise missile carriers stationed at air bases were hit. Our personnel operated across multiple Russian regions in 3 different time zones, and the people who assisted us were withdrawn from Russian territory before the operation. They are now safe. It is satisfying when something I authorized a year and 6 months ago comes to fruition and deprives Russians of over 40 units of strategic aviation. We will continue this work.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in the Lithuanian capital Vilnius for a summit with the leaders of NATO's Eastern and Nordic members. Secretary General Mark Rutte will chair the talks that include some of Ukraine's staunchest backers amid the Russian invasion. Ukraine's representatives are expected to hold bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the summit. DW's Juri Reschetto is in Vilnius. Juri, you're there for the NATO summit, but we just need to talk about the Ukrainian drone strikes first. How is Russia reacting?
Well, the Russian defense minister admitted so far that Ukrainian drones attacked military airfields in 5 regions. Nevertheless, the damage is, of course, clearly downplayed. We've got no official reaction from the Kremlin so far, which could be linked to the negotiations between the Russians and Ukrainians in Turkey today later. But there are a lot of very critical comments within the so-called Russian military bloggers, who are basically nothing other than unofficial Russian propaganda. They are outraged of how poorly the Russian planes were apparently protected, and they are calling for harsh consequences, first and foremost a very harsh retaliation against Ukraine.
And will these attacks influence today's NATO discussions in Vilnius?
Well, I think that these drone attacks would definitely also be a topic here, especially as Ukrainian President Zelenskyy is taking part in the talks, you said it. And he said yesterday that these attacks would go down in the history books. But there are enough other topics for the agenda, starting with the significantly higher military spending that is planned. Estonia, for example, is aiming to spend more than 5% of its GDP on defense. In addition to money spent, the deployment of US troops within the NATO contingent here in the Baltic states and Eastern Europe also might play a role today. The US government is reportedly considering withdrawing 10,000 soldiers from Eastern Europe.
And how might Russia's losses affect its long-range strike capabilities?
Well, of course, we have to be careful with all claims about the war on both sides. The Ukrainians claim that they have destroyed a third of the Russian long-range bombers. That would, of course, be quite a blow to the Russian war plans. At the same time, look, however, we can see that the small drones, in particular, can do a lot of damage, so that the large bombers, long-range bombers, no longer play such a significant role in today's modern warfare. What I rather expect is that the Russians would respond with a hard counterstrike against Ukraine soon.
And Juri, what's at stake for NATO as leaders gather here in Vilnius today?
Well, these benign states, so to say, also known as the Bucharest Nine, are a group of 9 Eastern European NATO member states. The coalition was created in response to the Russian occupation of Crimea in 2014. And the aim is to strengthen collective security. Within NATO, I have to say, these countries often argue for significantly tougher measures against Russia because due to their history, they know Russia well, as they were all either part of the former Soviet Union or in the Soviets' area of influence. In 2022, the importance of this coalition increased when the war in Ukraine began. Also, at today's summit here in the Lithuanian capital Vilnius, Northern European NATO states are present as well: Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland.
DW correspondent Juri Reschetto in Vilnius. Thanks so much.
Joining us now for more is Gustav Gressel, a military and security expert at the National Defence Academy in Vienna, Austria. Welcome. The attacks are a massive boost to Ukrainian morale and clearly a blow to Russia's credibility. But can you tell us, are they also militarily significant?
Yes, they are, but to which extent is a bit difficult to judge because we don't know who these 40 planes are, what kind. We know the kind of planes that were struck, but we don't know what struck means. Is totally destroyed or just slightly damaged. And we don't know the mix of aircraft that are sort of how many AWACS, so these A-40 AWACS did Ukraine hit. If they hit more than 2, then yes, Ukrainian air operations close to the border will be in some trouble. If it's just 1, if it's only lightly damaged, then not. On the bombers, the key bottleneck, of course, for cruise missile attacks is the availability of air-launched platforms. So how many bombers can Russia get into the air? But we don't know what percentage of the bombers hit are cruise missile carrying strategic bombers, which of them are operative bombers. So yeah, it's hard to say for now.
What about the planning that went into these attacks? I mean, clearly these were planned for a good while.
Yes, it is really a significant intelligence operation. You need to identify the targets, you need to reconnoiter the targets, the weaknesses, you need to know which kind of electronic security and protection measures are taken for the air bases, which frequencies are blocked, what kind of EW systems they have around the base, etc. You need to smuggle the drones, the explosives into Russia. You need to program the hijacking software to capture the mobile network around the airbase to get the footage back. And then you have to coordinate the transport routes of your pre-prepared prefab houses that launch the drones. It seems that the drivers have not been aware of what they're actually transporting, but accidentally they have been with the right container in the proximity of the right airbase. And that is a significant planning effort, and so the long preparation time, of course, is justified.
Do we know if Kyiv had any help from any of its allies to carry out this plan?
It doesn't look like it. So the drones are made in Ukraine. Also, the preparation, the programming is made from Ukraine. And to be honest, I'd be surprised if they had asked or informed any of the foreign partners, because usually stuff gets leaked out, and there are a lot of people in Western governments who are specifically concerned about the escalation issue. So attacking nuclear-capable bombers probably would have triggered red wires in the West. And so, no, I think we can pretty much exclude that possibility.
Let's talk about the timing. I mean, do you think it's likely that Kyiv timed the attacks to coincide with the peace talks in Istanbul today, or do you think that's just a coincidence?
It's most likely a coincidence. It's possible, of course, to adjust the timing to the talks, but it's very hard to do. As said, it is extensive preparation that has to be brought on, and this second Istanbul round was scheduled actually 1.5 weeks ago. So, given the long preparation time, 1.5 weeks is almost nothing for this kind of operation. Yeah, it could be, if all things were in place, it could have been accelerated or delayed to meet the day of the kickoff of these negotiations. But it was more or less a coincidence that the availability of the strikes, sort of the full level of preparedness, coincided with the time when these negotiations sort of were scheduled to happen.
There's been no official reaction from the Kremlin so far, but what do you think Vladimir Putin is going to... how do you think Putin will react to this?
Well, Russian official media is trying to downplay the incident. They talk of a terrorist incident, and that that Russian forces have fended off the attack. That's the official language, so they probably don't want to make a huge fuss about it. There is a probability that there will be a larger strike in the coming weeks and months, that maybe if they have clamped together another Reschetto ballistic missile, they might fire it, but that's roughly about it.
Military and security expert Gustav Gressel. Gustav, thanks so much for being on our programme today.
Thanks a lot.